Singapore's dramatic transformation in the 70s produced artworks that started to question authority and traditions in the 80s. In this episode, I look at artists who are considered the avant-garde, producing work that pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable in art. So what forms did this avant-garde take? An empty frame measuring 5 by 5 feet. This was Cheo Chai-Hiang's proposition for an artwork titled 5 by 5, Singapore River. Where is the river? And where is the art?
Cheo Chai-Hiang's 5 by 5 was essentially a proposal. In 1972, when he was still a first-year student at Brighton Polytechnic, he mailed a set of instructions to the Modern Art Society for them to draw a 5-foot square, partially on the wall and partially on the floor for its annual exhibition. This was quite a radical gesture at that time because, it resembled nothing of a painting or what people thought about what art is. The interesting bit about this work is that it's also titled in parentheses is Singapore River. It was also gesturing to conventions of painting reaching a kind of a dead end for scenes of Singapore River. Chai was interested at that time in questioning the conventions of painting. With this proposition, he was really intent on undermining all the preconceived notions that he had about painting. Here, he's only demarcated a space, which is 5 feet by 5 feet. So what do you call that? Is that still a painting? It's essentially a void. It's like nothing. But for Chai, this nothingness or this void could also be replete with a lot of meanings. So one can look into this 5 by 5 square and think about lots of different possibilities and potentials.
Aligned with the avant-garde notion, 5 by 5 was an artwork which definitely pushed the boundaries. While artwork started to move away from the conventional, more artists created works that reacted to policies of the state. This became more obvious after Singapore emerged from the tumultuous 60s, mired by labour strikes and riots. To attract investors, the government tried to shed its past to become a clean and orderly society. And by the late 70s, Singapore had become a thriving industrial and commercial centre, a result of strong government intervention. National campaigns were also introduced to change attitudes. Teo Eng Seng's A Child is Born was prompted by then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's public concerns about declining birth rates. He was concerned about the shift in attitudes of women, choosing careers over the traditional roles of mother and wife. As a result, a slew of campaigns and schemes were set up to induce women to marry and procreate.
A Child is Born is, of course, a pointed reference to the eugenicist, I would say, a lack of a more diplomatic word, policy by the government. So there's a stop at 2 policy, and then also the graduate mothers scheme, where Lee Kuan Yew was encouraging graduate mothers to have more babies or mate with men of similar stature, is somehow undercut once transposed onto a Singapore context. And then something so wonderful or wonderful sounding suddenly gets this cast of social engineering. But if you look at the work itself, unless you read into its other types of symbols and into the title, it would just be like any other kind of abstract art. Or it could also function on a very formalistic level as well. But I think for Eng Seng's case, he does transcend that. Eng Seng was an artist who was always sensitive to social-political issues. Also never forgets that this abstract art could also serve other function to address social political issues which he thinks or feels are very pertinent to the day. And he's extremely critical, of course, of social policies by the government.
Teo Eng Seng's art did not only critique social policies. He would next go on to make a strong personal statement against the detention of his sister by the state. On the Other Side of Silence, or Otosos by Teo Eng Seng. His sister, Teo So-lang, a lawyer, was detained for being involved in the alleged Marxist conspiracy in 1987. She was held without trial for more than 2 years under Singapore's Internal Security Act. Who is on the other side of silence? I see a lot of themes of humanity, and not just the beauty but also the ugliness of humanity in your work.
The beauty of ugliness.
The beauty of ugliness. That's very appropriate.
As they put it.
That's beautiful.
Yes. An event in Singapore that shocked me was the event called Operation Spectrum, or Marxist conspiracy. Because on 21st May 1987, my sister Teo So-lang disappeared, and it took me many days to discover what exactly happened to her. And when I finally found out through the newspaper, after a whole week without any news, it was revealed that there was this so-called Marxist conspiracy. So on my first visit to Whitley Road, the detention center, my first priority is to find out what sort of living condition she had in the cell. It was difficult to gather information directly from my sister, who had to speak to me with a glass between her and me, and then only talk through the telephone, the intercom. I got whatever information, and I produced a series of sculptures based on that, which led on to another one, which I exhibited in London at the Camden Arts Centre. The exhibition was called On the Other Side of Silence because it's only one side of the story, that is the story from the authority. So as an artist, I played my part in expressing my thoughts on the events that happened. And I hope that my works will be a testimony of the time. I'm not against any government or any authority. I'm just simply expressing my thought, contributing my view in order that Singapore can grow to be a better place, a more human place, other than just a place for making money.
Otosos is important because it registers an important event in Singapore history via art. And it also tells a story that has not really been told before in the public imagination. I think it was a difficult time for the protagonists, the persons who were arrested and detained without trial. So I think that episode deserves to be remembered, and finding other ways of remembering it without necessarily glorifying anybody or denigrating any authority.
I am an 80s child. As a teen, the Singapore then was a clean and green one. It was orderly but exciting. There was optimism in the air. New highways, buildings and malls were built. Food courts replaced hawker centers. I watched movies from Hollywood, wore Levi's jeans, read Smash Hits magazine, and ate and studied at Burger King. While we were overwhelmed by Western influences, we were also Asians with so-called Asian values. So what did it mean to be Singaporean? A group of artists from the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts came together to question Singaporean identity through their work titled Trimurti. In 1988, three young men fresh out of art school got together to create a show inspired by Eastern philosophy. I'm about to meet them to find out more. So I just wanted to ask you about your work from 26 years ago, Trimurti. And can you tell me what was the inspiration behind it?
Actually, the Trimurti is an outcome of against the resistance against the school of looking at the education system. And we three thought that we should graduate. It's supposed to be part of the graduation show. We're supposed to be part of it. And actually we said, no, we're not going to be part of the graduation show. Let's do something else out of the graduation show. So we sit down and discuss ourselves in a coffee shop. I remember, okay, let's see what shall we do. Then we talk a lot of things. Then I told them about the three forces, the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. It's the three different forces. And we can look at it from three different angles, like myself from Shiva, look at Indian perspective, Ichi from Vishnu, the preservator, and Saleh from Brahma, the creator, but taking our own philosophy of religion. I think what historically we were actually trying to locate our culture, aesthetic into our artwork. That is the historical direction we're looking at. We also want to redefine our art process in relation to the way we're coming from. Two is the location, second is our cultural background. I think that's our main intention to look at Trimurti. And the term multiculturalism was very much also connected to our work. So multiculturalism became part of our art making process eventually, because the diversity that we all are holding together. I mean, in one way, I can kind of endorse that multiculturalism, but not in a political sense, more artistic and social issues that we're dealing with, because we wasn't sure whether we are multiculturalism yet.
So when we were at NAFA, we were working together on the Eastern and the Western culture. In Singapore, when we decided to think about Singapore context, we feel that it should be international and local culture. How to blend the two together? Because Singapore at that time was becoming an international city. So that was the thing that we were trying to blend in, but yet at the same time trying to retain our own cultural identity.
But what we felt is that we are moving in a stronger direction. We still do now. We felt what was missing then was artists looking back on their own backyard instead of borrowing languages, instead of borrowing aesthetic from the outside world. We claim that we should look at ourselves more, and our struggle is always constantly looking at our individual art-making process. And I think that was really a shift. Because I remember they saying that, oh, you guys looking very ethnic, very, very much localized, That was also an issue then. Chandra works always about Indian art, I didn't feel like why should I not be ashamed of that? I should be able to embrace that. I think that was a good beginning for us historically, to embrace that who we are.
The exhibition was very much an attempt to open up this discussion about ethnic identities and ways in which they can be discussed in contemporary society then. I think during the period, people talk about it in terms of Asian values, and Asian values are rationalized to have given birth to the economic miracle that Singapore underwent in the 80s, and therefore the values that come with ethnicity became prominent, and they were actively promoted as a set of values that defines ways in which we do things that are different from the West. The setting, the period, at the same time too, their active involvement with the newer forms of art making, installation art performance, that makes Trimurti important.
It was an exciting time for artists to come together and work collectively. Their artworks were not only exhibited in galleries, but also in unusual places. The Artist Village, first located at Lorong Gambas, was an art collective started by Tang Da Wu in 1988. It was one of the collectives that ignited the spark for the contemporary arts and encouraged the plurality of voices to think through history, question society and culture.
Tang Da Wu, of course, is dominant because the artist village in many ways was his creation. It was his idea. And he had the personality, the charisma, the dynamism, the intellectual, imaginative, artistic and social capacity to draw people to him and keep them drawn to him. In addition to his own creative practice, which was without doubt at the forefront of the new, in which completely new forms of art, physically, visually, and in the method of making were produced. Among them was performance art, installation art, environmental art, land art. So art was no longer confined to the studio. The studio was one among many sites, many places from which and in which art was produced. So the appeal of art took on completely different dimensions.
I came here to look for the original site of the artist village, and this is all I could find. Imagine all this used to be farmland, and in the middle of that was the artist village. They were only here for 12 months, but it must have been a year that was bursting with creative energy. The artist village was eventually forced to relocate through the Land Acquisitions Act, which gave the authorities the right to acquire land for state use. During this period, there were other art collectives and collaborations between artists. Art was seen and encountered at non-art, non-conventional spaces. In 1992, the Artists Village co-organized The Space, a fringe festival which was part of the Singapore Festival of Arts, at the abandoned Hongbi warehouse, another unusual location given a new lease of life by the artists.
Hongbi Warehouse was, I think, the only fringe events in 1992 art fairs. That was a really challenging project because, I remember going around Robertson Quays to look for that premises. First time I realized that we have actually so many abandoned buildings being neglected. It was a very big challenge to transform an abandoned building into a very useful space.
It was an abandoned warehouse along the river, which was just lying in a state of limbo before it would be pulled down, as it has been pulled down. I guess it rivaled any of the prevailing museums and galleries in Singapore at that time. More art, more varied art, and more exciting art was produced in the warehouse than anything that was seen and conceived in any of the conventional art spaces in Singapore for that period of time.
In 1992, some 60 artists and their friends gathered in Hongbi Warehouse and watched the performance of a man dressed in a suit made out of photocopied US dollar notes. Today, Vincent Leow's Money Suit is regarded as an iconic artwork, a remnant from the now famous performance art piece. So tell me about the money suit and how it came about.
The money suit is all about this whole economy and the whole pursuit of wealth. I wanted to make a performance about how people will believe an object to bring them wealth. So I sort of made this performance. If I were to wear a suit made of money, people will see it as a way to bring fame and fortune to them. So I sort of used that idea, and then I made this suit out of photocopied US dollars, and I made a performance simulating the three-legged dog. Yeah.
Did you also feel that it reflected societal values or what was going on in the country at the time?
The artists were all trying different material and different ideas and ways to express our art. And I think it was not encouraging if we don't get a lot of feedback or appreciation from the public. I feel that there is a lot of things related to my work, like whether it's the money suit relating to me as an artist. The money suit is all about this whole economy and the whole pursuit of wealth. They are all very relevant to us and to me as an artist, and I wanted to do something about it. The three-legged toe, the some of the subject matter I do definitely relates to the topics in the news. Yeah.
From the point of view of an artist who has lived through this period, do you feel disconnected to the country?
I definitely feel connected because I grew up here and I experienced the changes, and even as an artist, this transformation of me somehow feels sometimes very similar to what Singapore is transforming into.
So Hongbee Warehouse was like a space where there was a lot of collective work that was being done, and how did that affect you as an artist?
Hongbee Warehouse is a really big space. The place was sort of like quite run down, no electricity, the whole place is covered with dust. And everyone came and they kind of like cleaned up this place to be a really nice exhibition space that a lot of really interesting activity happened. I mean, there wasn't a lot of galleries, so it is very important to sort of create our own initiative, to create spaces for artists. We were all dependent on ourselves, so I think it was kind of like a really interesting period for us. So at that time, there was also a sort of petition that we want to try to keep the place, but I think in the end, development is more important. Yeah.
This was the site of the Hongbee Warehouse. Now it is the quayside, a lifestyle attraction and condominium by the river. A mirror of Singapore's development and perhaps pragmatism. During this period, artists were struggling to create a new vocabulary that ran parallel to the rapid development of the city-state. Their voices were bold and often critical. What they wanted to say was not necessarily what the state wanted to hear. The visual arts were no longer just about paintings and sculptures. It had moved into the contemporary to express the complex issues of our times. Where would this take Singapore art? What's next?